G'day everyone, welcome to Talking Leadership. This is Eric Perez, your podcast host, welcoming you back. By way of introduction, my guest today is the founder and CEO, project management professional and project leadership expert with purpose-driven projects. She is also the people and projects leadership specialist with the X Factor Collective, and she is the founder and host of Let's Talk Project Management. Can I welcome to the podcast, Melanie Colling. How are you, Melanie?
I'm good, thanks, Eric. Thanks so much for having me.
Mate, thank you for coming. And looks like you don't sleep too much with all those roles there, mate. So it seems to be a lot on. So look, thank you again for giving up your time to speak with me. So let's start where we need to start with this conversation, and being that it's about you and your leadership pathway. Where did it start and why leadership? What drew you to leadership roles?
It's a good question. And where did it start? It was actually started when I was a kid. So I'm the eldest child, and my sisters always told me I was bossy, but I just thought I was being a good leader. You know, they just needed to know what to do, and I was just telling them. And it's funny because I never realized that. But when I look back and now talking about leadership and teaching others about it, you know, I look back at it and I'm like, oh, okay, it did start back then, you know, because I did that naturally. And that's what I talk about in leadership is, you know, finding a natural style and stuff. So, yep, it started back there. But in my career, it took me on the path down project management. And so, you know, project management is leading a team of people on a project to get something done. So again, you know, I found that a natural fit, which is why I succeeded in the project management industry. And then as I went through my career, you know, there was more roles around, you know, program management and then portfolio management, you know, which included people management, et cetera, et cetera. So it just grew from there. But I think because I had that natural, I won't say gift, but I just enjoyed doing it, then that's why it led me to different roles that built up on the leadership side.
I haven't asked this before, but I might tease this out a little bit, seeing as you brought it up, and it's of interest to me because I'm also the eldest of two. Do you think that birth order has some leadership connotations there, or am I reading too much into that? I've never given this a lot of thought, and I'm sure there'll be research on this somewhere, so I claim no expertise. But yeah, do you think there's some link there, at least from your experience?
Absolutely. And there's a lot of stuff written about birth order, and it's really fascinating. I love that stuff. You know, I'm the eldest of three, so, you know, and all girls. And so, you know, naturally you are leading your siblings or paving the way for them to do something at certain milestone points. You know, your parents give you some, you know, allow you to do things, and then your sisters have to catch up with you, you know, to then do that. So you're kind of naturally leading them, but also being put in a leadership role by your parents as such, as being the eldest of a group of children. And then, you know, the middle child always has that, you know, we're stuck in the middle. We're not the eldest with the responsibility, but we're not the youngest, and we can get away with stuff. And then the youngest just gets away with everything, and they can do everything early. And, you know, you're like, but I had to wait till I was this age before I could do that. And, you know, that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I do believe it. Birth order has got something to do with it.
For me, leadership is about being of service to others. I think fundamentally for me that it's a people game. And that's my definition. It's not as comprehensive as others, but it's what drives me and why I do what I do. So let me ask you, how do you define leadership?
Yeah, and I would agree with what you said there in your definition. It's really a push-pull, isn't it? You know, like management, you're pushing people to do things. You're making them do it. Whereas leadership is that you're pulling them, you're motivating, inspiring, encouraging them to do things, and they're wanting to do it. And I really think that that's the definition of, you know, it's about, you know, getting people on the bus, and do they want to be on there and follow you? And that's the definition of leadership, if people want to come and follow you.
Let me go rogue here a little bit and ask you a question, because I know you deal with a lot of people, and it's interesting you bring up that because I've stopped asking the question around leadership versus management, but it's nice to come back to it, to have a bit of a play on that. Can you develop leadership in your management team that takes that old stereotype of management away, and can managers serve a managerial function but operate as effective leaders as well? So I think with any job, whether you're in a management role or leadership role, and I'll get you to comment on this if you can, so I'll try and express this as succinctly as I can, that the function of working in a workplace, whatever it is, means you're letting someone direct you to get a task done or to reach some kind of goal. you don't necessarily have to use control methodology, which is the traditional view of management, to get people to do things. And I subscribe to the idea, and this is untested, I have no data to back me on this, that I think you can get people to commit to you as a manager with good leadership techniques and still be a manager and not just formally the leader at that sort of macro level. Is that something you would be on board with, or do you have a different view, Melanie?
No, I agree. So yes, you can be a manager and have the operational element to your role, but it's really about trusting the people to do that, and helping support them to do the operational side, and not be that, kind of taskmaster, micromanager, making sure they've done it, give them that level of trust that they can do it, and then inspire them to do bigger and better things. That's the really role of the leader. So anyone can be a manager. Not everyone can be a leader. Leadership
is about making decisions, and sometimes it's a lonely road. So that lonely road of leadership, do you think it is one, or is it as lonely as you make it?
Oh, yeah, good question. Again, it comes down to a couple of things. It's your leadership style. So my leadership style is very people-based. So, I understand people. So I work out what they need and I support them to make sure that they do what they need to do to be successful. That's my style. Other people have different styles, more database, so they're in the detail and tracking things on a spreadsheet and that kind of stuff. That's not my style. And so everyone has a different style of leading. And just remind me of the question, sorry, Ari.
That lonely road of leadership, yes. Is it as lonely as you make it, or is it really a solo path?
Yeah. Depending on your style, mine's always together with people, whereas some people would just, sit in my office and direct people, and, I don't need to be part of the group. So you can make it lonely or you can make it collaborative, depends on your natural way of doing things in your natural style. But also it's really hard for those people coming from a worker to a manager. And a lot of people are put in a role because they're good at the job. Then they're like, okay, you can be the manager. And that doesn't always necessarily mean they're the best person to be the manager or the leader of that team, because that's a whole lot of different skill sets that you need to lead people, and manage. And so that's where sometimes the challenge is that people are put into that role. And, as we know, there's not much support or training for people, in a leadership role, depending on which organisation you work in and which level. And then you have to then differentiate yourself between, yes, I was a worker and now I'm a manager leader. And, do I still hang out with the guys and go and grab a coffee, or do I draw a line in the sand and go, oh, I'm not allowed to do that now because I'm a manager, right? And a lot of people have struggled with working out where they fit then, and they used to fit in this space and now they're, in this space. And so I think there's a few elements to that about how you navigate that change if you've gone from worker to manager, and then how you find your natural style to do it, and then what works for you. And it doesn't always have to be lonely. It's just how you, create that environment and space for you and your style.
It's an interesting observation and quite a fascinating one you bring up around, do organisations do the job well of promoting people from operational roles into managerial leadership roles? And topics come up in discussions I've had with people as well as on the podcast. And I don't think that there's a lack of businesses wanting to do that well. I think there's an assumption that's often made that if you've got years of experience in a position that you should be able to lead others in it. And technical knowledge does not equal ability to manage other people. The other side to this coin is that people are adaptable and people will take on a challenge if it means potentially progressing through an organization, which most people want to do, but some don't. Do you find that organizations do those transitions well in your experience, or not, or somewhere in between?
I think somewhere in between. I mean, I was very lucky in my career that when I transitioned into management, I was actually working for IBM at the time, and they had a really good program for leadership training where you actually went off and, it was a decent chunk of time. I think it was, 5 days or something where you went through this whole program, which really set me up for success, and other managers that went through it. And a lot of it was do I need this yet? But it actually, you always reference that when you come back to it. So I was lucky I got that training. I don't think that's always the case. And I think some of the challenges in business is it's so fast paced now that everyone's like, quick, we just got to get someone in there. And then they just put someone in there. And it's like, well, they've just got to do it, like, because we need to get moving and get stuff done. And there's like this time, well, we haven't got time to do that. But, the downside of that is, well, if you haven't got time to invest in that person, then that person's not going to be as successful as they would be, if you did invest in them and give them some guidance, leadership, even if it's mentorship from someone that has gone through that journey before and that can guide them and be there for them to ask questions. That is better than nothing. And so I think, you can't expect someone just to step into that role with no support whatsoever, because that's a big leap.
Going to say here's a bit of a smart ass insight from the podcast host for what this is worth. What's the cost of not helping transition that person? Because if you get someone who is unprepared and doesn't know how to engage with the role, you could potentially lose money, not just through them, but through contracts or roles or tasks that need to get completed. The flip side, and this can happen, I've seen it happen, that the person gets angry and embittered that they've got a role that they don't want, but they can't shirk the responsibility because, like you said, there's operational need to have them there, and you don't want an angry or uncommitted person in a role like that. And the more senior that goes, the more the implications are for the business. So what's the cost of doing it wrong? But
because they impact so many more people in a leadership role. Like, yes, it was just them in their role. Then they'd lead a team of 5. That's 5 more people they're impacting, and then so on and so on. So
I wonder what the multiplier is if you've got an unprepared, undertrained person in a managerial role and they have people that account to them, that report to them, that the more reports that you've got coming to you, that's individuals that you're managing. What's the multiplier if they start getting pissed off that they've got someone that seems not to either want their job or know what they're doing, or a combination of the two? And not forgetting here, you add the layer that this can cause a lot of stress to the individual in that role. So I'm not blaming them for a second, and I've been asked this before, and I don't know how to answer this question. At what point in that process is it incumbent on the individual to say to his or her bosses, I'm not the person for this job. I want to keep in the company, but I can't do the role. And I think that takes a level of fortitude that most people, I couldn't do it. Yeah, interesting one, that. Look, Melanie, let me ask you something. Measuring success, how have you done that in roles that you've had, and what have you seen others do to measure what we might call success in leadership?
So for me, success in leadership is that my team are successful. That will make me successful. So that was my only thing to do. It's like, what do I need to do to make you guys successful? How do I need to support you? What do you need? And that's where you differentiate between a good leader and a great leader. Now, we've all had different leader role models in our career, and I'm sure you've got a few stories there too, Eric. But the good leaders that I've seen operate is really, that they're focused on their team. So I talk about this a little bit too around, when you get into that leadership role, when you're a worker, you are focused on the client or the end user or whoever you are delivering your role to, like who's that person. When you become a leader, you face into your team, right? You've got to turn around and you've got to say, that's my client, right? I've got to support my team to then support the client. And that's why leadership is such a tricky thing, because it's a real mindset shift. And yeah, you've got to change the way that you operate. And that's where people struggle to make that change, or they're not even aware that that's what they've got to do to make that shift.
An amazing insight, mate. Thank you for sharing that. I never looked at it that way, that when you're in that leadership position there, you look at your people almost as clientele, as well as almost like a customer. What are their needs versus what your external customer base looks like? Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, we could unpack that for a while. I've got questions, but
the podcast episode for that
yes, that deserves its own little session. Leader capabilities. Now, this one is near and dear to me because it's the point. It's one of the driving reasons I do the podcast, and I'm genuinely interested in what people say are their key leader capabilities. And like anything in all these conversations, Melanie, there is no right or wrong. I'm just here to tease out from your grey matter what you believe are those critical leader capabilities. So over to you, mate. What do they look like? What are they?
So for me, and what I've learned over the time is to know your natural style. And that's really what I help people understand now, because there's a lot of times I know in my career where I've looked at other leaders and go, oh, maybe I should do it that way. Or they're doing it that way, I need to do it that way too. And it wasn't my style. And so I'm never going to be successful following someone that's a different natural style to what I am. And so you've got to find what works for you. You've got to find that style that works, and then embrace it. Like, don't push it away and go, oh, I'm too friendly, or, this, that, the other. It's like, that's my style. How can I make it work? And, I was just on a webinar with Simon Sinek, and if you know Simon Sinek, he's like Start With Why, did this TED talk, and he's now talking about people, workplaces and how we can change cultures and things like that. And he was talking about how you can influence and change, and what we used to call soft skills, right? And he's like, I hate the term soft skills, it's just people skills, right? And it's what we need in use in our everyday life. And it's just what we should be bringing to a job, but it's never really been thought of as high on the list. And what we're seeing now, and I gave a presentation recently to a PMI group, that where technical skills were the highest requirement from, we were looking for project managers, it's like 1 or 2% below is leadership skills, right? And leadership skills is all of your technical knowledge and experience plus your people skills, your leadership skills, how you manage people, how you, get people to do stuff, basically whatever style that is, and your natural way of doing that. So whatever you do outside of work is how you would do that normally in work, and how do you bring that to your new role and make it your own, and, look at other people, but look at them, okay, does that fit in with my style? And, kind of take bits and pieces from other people, but use what's innate and natural to you first.
When you're talking about some leader capabilities, being viewed potentially as soft skills or soft capabilities, I think it's because there's a difficulty in finding a language and a way to measure some of these skill sets, and that because we don't know how to do that, or are uncomfortable trying to do that, that we have to put a label on it so that it sounds like it's unimportant in the scheme of things. And I would challenge, in most industries, I can't think of one that wouldn't fit this, what I'm going to say next, that I don't think is a mind-blowing, revelation, that organizations will never meet their goals, whether they're for profit or not for profit, if the people you've got helping deliver them don't feel invested in delivering that. And if you really took a very much a process focused, people are just part of the cog and they just have to deliver because they're getting paid an income, you're not going to see a lot of success, in my view. The other contentious thing in my mind on this is that when you're looking at what those capabilities are, and you've mentioned the ones that are particularly important for you, and can't disagree with the list. It's your list. It's what you've learned. I bring a slightly different view to it personally, and I think all of those skill sets that have to do with bringing people along, how you present yourself, your degree of empathy, your emotional intelligence, your EQ, all of those things together that focus on people is that social glue that keeps organizations going. And leaders know how to access that and need to be able to access those things because they humanize you in the world of work. Otherwise, people are going to look at you as a robot and there's not going to be a connection. Where I think this conversation gets interesting for someone like me, and I'm looking at this from put a researcher lens on this just for a second, and love to get your view on this. I truly believe that in whatever the suite of those capabilities are, that I think that there's a group of the people skills that are leader capabilities that people draw on to different degrees to make the day go. But the ones that are critical for effective leadership, now this is a next step. So I'm not saying those other ones aren't important, but things to me like strategic thinking, foresight, and more recently, an appetite for ambiguity. I think if those three things are not present in leaders, you're not going to have as effective a leader as you might otherwise have. Now, always open for the debate on the degree to which you need to have those skills honed and those capabilities to the cutting edge, whatever that looks like. But I think more conversations need to be had about this, because if you had leaders in any industry that don't have a roadmap for the future, whatever that looks like, whether it's a daily roadmap or a monthly or a roadmap that's 5 years out, you can't envisage not just futures, but possible realizable futures, and you don't know how to deal with ambiguity as it creeps up along that journey, I don't think you can get the job done. A personal view, I'm building this view over time and from talking to people, but I'm more convinced than ever that there's something to this that doesn't necessarily get the airplay that I think it should, because I believe if you look at that pendulum idea, that there's been too much of a swing, I think, to the people skills. Without those skills, you can't be a good leader. No, I don't think anyone with any common sense has ever said those things aren't important. It's that I think there's a combination of these things coming through, which is what makes leadership complicated. And I reckon it keeps it interesting, at least for people like me, because you can keep having conversations with people like yourself. Do you believe there are great gradients or some capabilities that are more important than others, or do you not look at it that? Do you look at it a different way?
I agree with everything that you've said there, that you need all of those elements. So you need to, when I talk to people and, teach my model, I start with compelling vision, because if you don't have a vision of where you're going, then how can people follow you? Right. So you've got to set that scene and set that vision. So I agree that, you've got to have that foresight, that strategic vision of where you're going and how the team can follow you and what you're going to achieve together, to get everybody on board. And then it is absolutely about being strategic and having measures in place. So how are you going to measure that you're successful? Like if you're not drawing a line in the sand and say, hey, this is what we're going to achieve, then people don't know what they're working towards. So you need all of those elements. And I suppose your natural style brings those all together in how you work out what's the best way for you to bring all those things together. Everyone's got a different style of doing that, but they still need all of those elements to be successful, because you can't just, you're right, have the people skills and go, oh, if I'm getting everybody to do what they need to do, but I'm actually not measuring success or got the vision that's aligned with where the organisation is going, then yeah, we might be successful, but on the completely wrong thing.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's an open question and debate, because I know, having read some of the literature and following some other podcasts and listening to some real out there thinkers in this space, that it's still an ongoing discussion, and I think one well worth having, because if you take the view, which I do, that industry spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year on training people, developing leadership, understanding what it means for them across the private and public sector, in the ag sector, in the non-ag sector. You've got any number of groups whose sole function is to get better leadership and to talk about it. If anyone had the magic bullet, it would be, we would have it by now. And so this is what I think keeps it interesting. Maybe what we're talking about here, and I think you've talked about it through the entire discussion, is if you look at the bigger picture of leadership, how do the bits fit together? And if you are out there with your own system for leadership, like you just said before, then you found a formula that works for you, and others, they're coming on board and using it and it's effective for them. That's great. That's as much as you can do to get something done, because I think there's a lot of businesses that if they're not asking themselves a question about how do you get better longevity in the business, and maybe even more fundamental question, what are we trying to prep our leaders for? What's the purpose of giving them these skill sets? That to me is a macro question. I don't expect you to have an answer now, but I'm throwing that out there for conversations. Whoever wants to have the conversation with me or amongst their own leadership people is, what are we doing this for? If we're training, for what end? To achieve just organizational goals, to develop better individuals, to inculcate a different culture in your organization? Like, what's the end point of better leadership?
And I think that's different for every organisation, isn't it? Because they've all have different values, they'll all have different goals, and they'll all have different things that are more important. So what is their priority? And I talked about this recently, actually, around like looking at different industries and where your natural style fits. So, if you're more innovative and an innovative leader, then you're going to be more inclined to work for startups and, tech companies and things like that. So, don't look for something in finance and banking, for example, because that's going to be really, structured and process driven and a lot of data and detail. That's for someone that kind of is naturally like that. And I think when you were talking about leadership and how do we how do we teach for leadership? And there is so many people with so many different ways of doing it. It is really hard because you can teach an element of leadership that's process driven. So, the measurement, how to do performance reviews, all of that tangible stuff that has a process to it, but you can't teach for the people element, as in what's your natural style. All you can do is give people awareness to that, which is what I do, and say, once you know yourself, and then know the people around you, then you know how to get that work done and how to lead that group of people. And that will change when the people change, but the process element you can teach for. And that's why leadership training is so tricky. And then it also depends on the organisation, like where do they want to go and what do they want their leaders to be doing to support their organisation and where they're going.
You've probably spoken about before, but I'll get you on the podcast with a response if I could. Are leaders born or are they made?
Bit of both, I think. People have the natural ability and they'll probably go into those roles of their own accord more naturally. People that need to be nurtured will be maybe put in that role, but then given support to be a leader. And I think that's another challenge too, is, some people, like we were talking about, are in a role and then are made a manager or a leader, and some are successful and some aren't. And so, some obviously have the natural ability and some need a little bit more nurturing to be more successful in that role. So, yeah, I would say both, but different strategies.
Okay, Melanie, thank you for that. Now, here's the final element to the discussion, and I'm interested to see what you've got to say here. Looking back on your leadership pathway, what would you say to a younger version of yourself about being a more effective leader?
Trust yourself. Just trust yourself and follow your natural style. And don't think that, you've got to emulate other people and their style. Find your own style, nurture it, grow it, stick with it, trust yourself. And yeah, you'll grow much faster and have a much easier ride.
Melanie, thank you for that. So for those listening, I've been speaking to Melanie Colling. Melanie, as part of the process for the podcast, I just want to hand over to you to do a bit of a plug for what it is that you're doing. So the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. Well, yeah, like I've said in our discussion, Eric, I'm really passionate about helping people in that leadership role because it's a really, it is challenging, but it's also so rewarding. I'm really passionate about, getting people into those roles, but being successful and finding their own way to do it through what I've learned, over my experience. So I love helping people with that. And the thing that I've been asked a little bit about, is remote leadership and how do we do that when we're now all disjointed because of COVID. And it's more and more to understand the people that we're working with and the whole person, not just the person that rocks up to work, because you are seeing them now in their home with their family around them. And so that's becoming more and more, one of the strategies that people have to adapt to, like we've all adapted to, to working remotely. So I love working, with people that, leaders that want to enable their team, and we call it unlocking potential. So, finding the potential in your people and in your team, and then that goes into your organisation. So that's what I've been doing with purpose-driven projects. Part of my work with the X Factor is around doing that for social purpose businesses, NGOs, not-for-profits, social enterprises, which has been really exciting. And then on the flip side, I also love the world of podcasting and a co-founder in Experts on Air, where we help people find guest spots to talk to lovely people like you about what we know. So I love doing all that stuff. And as you can probably tell, I'm a people person, been dying here in lockdown Melbourne. So I'm super excited to get out on Friday and see some more people and, just get the opportunity to work with people and help them on their leadership journey.
No worries, Melanie. Thank you for that. And we'll make links to your business and website and contact details on LinkedIn available if that's all right with you.
That would be perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. So for those listening, I've been speaking to Melanie Colling. Thank you again for your time.
My pleasure, Eric. Thank you.
And we'll catch you all on the next podcast.